Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play StarTropics 2. In the last part we started off Chapter 7 and now we're in King Arthur's Castle, which I guess would be Tintagel because that's the one I think that's most usually associated with it, but oh well. So let's go talk to the king himself. He's all the way in the back. Most of the NPCs here don't say really anything to know because this chapter's pretty straightforward. Welcome to Camelot. Mike, I am Arthur, King of the Britons. Wise old Merlin the magician told us to expect you, and you are just in time, too. There's this awful, mean, terrible dragon you see, and he's making a mess of things. I call my brave and powerful knights, but they all seem to be out on quests. Would you, brave Mike, smite down this terrible beast? Sure. You are indeed very brave. I hereby christen you Sir Mike. And they just give you a free life up here. I think that's kind of weird placement, but okay. You're now a Knight of the Round Table. Good luck on your journey. Alright, sure. I should note, if you refuse that offer from King Arthur, he goes, well, you're not very brave. Get the hell out. And you have to come outside of the castle again and talk to the lady right there in order to make his dialogue look back to the start. So you're not screwed, but it is a very weird flagging thing. I don't even know why he give you the option unless it's a true but thou must situation, but eh. But now we're in the dungeon, and the dungeons in this particular chapter, they're more straightforward than the one in Transylvania last chapter. But they have a lot that's out to kill you. In fact, I'd say this is where the game really starts to get not quite dickish with its traps, but definitely a little like, why? For instance, right in that room, when you kill all the slimes, you fall down automatically. But if you fall down in the wrong place of the screen, you have to go back upstairs through this pathway over here, and I had to do this because I wanted to get that potion for the boss at the end of this. Hit this panel here to make this door unlock, to go back into that room and kill those 3 slimes again. Just as a rule of thumb, whenever you're in a room where you can kill all the enemies, always kill them around the central north part of the screen, because that's when you're probably going to fall down and land on the platform you really need. There's also a couple of potions you can really go out of your way to get. I'm getting one right now on this side of the screen up here to the north, but I don't recommend going around in the giant spiral to get that other one, because the amount of enemies you have to go through to get to it is just not worth it for the amount of health it'll give you, in my eyes. But even on this next screen with this green dude, make sure to kill him around the northern part of the screen, because the platform we need to get to in order to progress is below me right now after we've killed him. And you need to be careful even more so about your placement because you might fall down onto spikes. The knights are weird enemies a little bit, in that they are more directly Dark Nuts from Zelda 1 than basically anything else in the game. But you can hit them very quickly to start. But there's more variance to them as we go through these dungeons that gain not only more health, but they eventually gain a shield so you can only hit them from behind, I believe. And these rooms are a little bit odd as well, because you actually have a bit of a timer going on here to get around not only these projectiles, but before the spikes become a point, the spikes progress to a point where you cannot jump over them anymore. You'll just have to take the hit. And they're aware you'll take some hits there, clearly, because they really want you to get that health up. Boss of this sub-dungeon is almost directly lifted out of Zelda 2. We got a knight on a horse here who's constantly throwing knives either down at you or up at you. It can't fire sideways. This fight's annoying not because the enemy himself hurts a lot, although he does do some decent damage. It's more so just trying to actually hit the guy. That's really annoying here. Throwing diagonally can help in some cases, but I recommend trying to do some little jumps to stagnate your own movement across the screen to try and get yourself into a vantage point where you could easily hit the boss. It's one of those where the ultimate strategy is probably just to flail your best and hope. Are there harder bosses in the game? Oh, absolutely. The boss at the end of the next dungeon, as well as, of course, the Ghost Miner, are much harder fights. It's just more so this one's annoying. In that regard, I guess it's kind of similar to the Zoda spawn at the end of, the first dungeon in London, but eh. Also, again, we're in a fictional plot line for this supposedly otherwise historical game. So that's, what, 3 for 4-ish? I think, no, I actually think it's evenly 3 for 3 because chapter 1 was just the plot starting up. This game is oddly more fictional than it is not for everything else going on in the game. Woohoo! Hello, Mike. I'm glad that you have come so far. I'm sure that you remember my other disguises. Other disguises? Monkey! Donkey. Man. Call me Merlin. I'm the magician in King Arthur's court. Long ago, I had a good friend from a faraway planet. His name was Hirokon. He spread the tetrads across time and space so that only a hero could find them. When last we spoke, he asked me to watch over such a hero in his journey someday. That hero was you, Sir Mike, and that day has come. You must now collect the last tetrad and put them all together. The fate of Hirokon's race rests on you. I'll now give you the last and most powerful magic. And we get the Ultra Psychic Shockwave, the best weapon in the game, I think, bar none. Now continue your journey along this path and fight for the final tetrad. The Ultra Psychic Shockwave's individual power is technically weaker than the katana. I think it only does twice the damage of the axe versus the katana's 2.5. But to make up for it, it's got the best range in the game. It can basically reach entire rooms across from you. And it's got higher rate of fire to begin with, so it's just the better weapon. The worst part about it is that A, you have to hear that sound effect every time you throw it now, and B, like the previous upgrade for this weapon, if you take too much damage, it reverts back. If you restore that health, it reverts forward again. So you really need to use the distance it gives you to stay away from enemy attacks, because otherwise, you're going to lose out on a really good weapon. The only things technically stronger than it are the Tri-Star, because the Tri-Star does more damage, period, but it also has the spread gun-like range going on. And even though I don't think there's any more in the game, period, to find, the spike disc throwing weapons are still stronger than it. This should just be your main weapon moving forward, period, barring enemies that are immune to it overall. It's kind of absurd. With that said, the second sub-dungeon in this chapter, I'd say is probably the second hardest dungeon in the game next to the Count's Castle, if only for that one's size. As there's a lot of enemies that can only be really found here that are just kind of annoying to deal with, like these faster green slimes that split off from a bigger one. The knights, as we saw in the last sub-dungeon. And how do you guys like Triceratops that can belch out giant fireballs that are very easy to jump over, but you should not take those hits because I think they do about minimum 2 or 3 hearts worth of damage? The knight enemies aren't too bad individually, but it's when you get like 2 or 3 of them in a room, it gets really annoying to deal with them. It's only because 2 spread shots being aimed at you at once is kind of hard to dodge, even if you can jump over basically every projectile in the game. This is a good contender to use your Tri-Stars on because I think the Psychic Shockwave is overall more useful during the boss fight, even though the Tri-Stars are still good to have. It's all a matter of perspective, I suppose. It does make me wonder about, because I know I've wondered about a StarTropics 3 a couple times throughout this, like why we haven't seen a game like this since. If we got a third game, they would just expand the amount of weapons you had, period. Like having an in-between of like the physical weapons and such, just to deal with specific enemy types, and they could really, especially I think on the Super Nintendo forward, have done a lot with enemy reactions to things. Like we could have had something, this is going to be a weird comparison, we could have had something like on the level of Illusion of Gaia with the amount of enemies and how they react to things, because not for nothing, I think that game's got a lot of problems. But the way enemies react to you and the way the dungeons are structured is really interesting for most of its runtime. No, I just realized one day I really still have to do Soul Blazer and Terranigma. I've been kind of holding off on those for some reason. I like to only have like 1 or 2 RPGs on my hard drive at a time, though, recording-wise, because that is a lot of hard drive space. Especially if I'm doing like an FF tier game or a Pokemon tier. Something shorter like a Crystallis, a little less so, because that's a pretty short game. You know, looking at it from a non-player perspective that I'm actually commentating over, something I do kind of appreciate about StarTropics 2 is that I think its platforming, honestly, gets a really good difficulty curve going on. Because you start with basically no bottomless pits, but they slowly introduce more and more throughout the game to the point where you get rooms like this that are mostly pit. But it doesn't feel uncomfortable despite Mike's jump curve being weird. Oh boy, here we are. Here's the Golden Dark Nuts. Like Dark Nuts in Zelda, they can only be attacked from behind, and they move fast and attack more often, and whenever they attack, they tend to rotate which direction they're facing anyway. These things suck to fight. There's only a couple of them in the game, but I hate them. From my experience, it's easier to hit them from below if you're aiming diagonally, if only because diagonally they have a much wider sprite than they do horizontally. But that's mostly from the bottom to begin with, and it could just be my brain fooling with me for all I know. Guys, remember these from Italy? They're back, and we have to deal with them a little bit differently. But they're much easier to take care of this time, because not only are they in straight lines, we don't need to get them into any holes. If anything, I'm kind of surprised they didn't do more with that concept throughout the game. Maybe they figured the 2 rooms was all they could figure out how to do with the base mechanics set. This room's weird. We got a whole lot of panels, only one of them spawns the thing that unlocks the door, and you gotta dodge these randomly dropping bombs to find it. From memory, I think it's like mid-left of the screen, but I can never remember where it is just because it's the only time the game actively does something directly like this. If anything, it's the closest searching for the panels gets to looking for the buttons in the original StarTropics. But it's just pretty annoying, especially because whenever one of the bombs explodes, that residue effect covers at least probably 3 to 5 different panels that you can't touch until it goes away. And if it spawns on top of the wrong one, you just have to wait until a few seconds pass to actively open the door. It's a very minor inconvenience, but with the amount of damage the bombs can do, it can be pretty devastating. Hesitate for a second before grabbing that. That's kind of a dick move, game. Because those flamethrowers, whenever they show up in the game, they aren't timer-based, they are proximity-based. So if you get too close to that rushing into the potion, you're just going to take a dumb hit. Ooh, I love this song. It's probably my favorite song in the game. So we got arrows pointing left and right here, but that's not a choice of where you can go, because in order to progress, you would need to go right. But I am going to get some of the extra items around here because they're very easy to grab compared to some of the ones back in like the Count's Castle. And not for nothing. You're probably going to want them for the boss fight, because the boss fight of this chapter is less wild than, say, the Ghost Miner, for instance, or even Zoda-Y back in the previous chapter. But it's just a harder fight to get hits in on, and it's one where if you get hit, you're taking some serious damage. You might lose the Ultra Psychic Shockwave if you're not careful. Even if you are careful, you're likely to lose it at least once or twice, depending on the amount of damage you take. You know, now that I think about it, I wonder if it's even... It's probably possible to beat this game without getting hit, but now I'm curious. There's gotta be, like, no damage challenge runs on there. There's the final boss, Katana only no damage. Chapter 7 damage, no... Chapter 7 dungeon, no damage. Looks like Master Knight DH on YouTube's done a lot of no damage stuff for games, period, because I see Pac-Man World on here, too. Stuff like no damage runs always interests me in some extent, especially if the game will actually reward you for doing it in some way, but then there's games like Mega Man 9 and 10 that give you achievements for it that I'm just like, nah, I don't need to do that. That's a little bit too much for me, I feel. Deathless, though, I will try to do games deathless all the time. Even if doing that for Shovel Knight on New Game Plus is probably one of my biggest trophy hunting regrets from over the years. It's like that, going for the Yakuza 3 Platinum period, Sonic Forces Platinum Trophy. Ugh. There's some regrets from there over the years, and I still keep doing it because I just don't know when to quit. In seemingly unrelated news, I'm about to finish up Atelier Ryza 2, and what do you mean I'm going for the Platinum Trophy in that? Oh god, not again, there's so many loops to get. Something I do find a little interesting about the 2 StarTropics games is that their endgames, despite having the same mechanics at the end of the day, kinda go opposite directions from memory. StarTropics 2's dungeons towards the end tend to be more enemy rushes and combat rooms than the first game, which from memory was more so you could ignore a lot of the enemies, you just had to find the buttons to push in a lot of cases. Especially thinking of the alien ship at the end of the first game. Like that thing, you could get through most of it without having to fight most of those enemies. You probably still wanted to because they were just annoying enemies, but you could ignore a lot of it. And then here in the second game, it's mostly combat rooms here at the end, admittedly, because we are getting close. Free potion, I will take it. I think the most potions I've had at once in the game is about 5 or 6. There's not many opportunities you can do that to begin with. I want to say it's just the Count's Castle and the final dungeon next part you can get that many in. But you can get that many, and you're probably going to want that many for what the end of the game has to offer for you. But now we're on to the boss fight of this chapter. It's the dragon. This is the only boss fight in the game that has a rough time limit, because those spikes, I believe, do eventually get to the bottom of the screen. And the annoying thing about the dragon is you can only hit its face, which is an elevation level above you, so you need to constantly jump. The dragon only has 2 attacks outside of outwardly walking towards you menacingly and the spikes behind it. It can fly all over the place, spewing spread shots of fire at you in several directions, or it can actively aim a 3-way fire breath from the floor level. The flying all over the place attack is definitely the more annoying one, only because it's really hard to predict where it's going to move and where it's going to fire towards. And on top of that, actively dodging the fire it fires, as redundant as that sentence sounds, is just really tough given the size of its hitbox and the small size of the platform. But if you use the potions you've gained along the way, it does die pretty quickly. That's one thing I like about this game. None of the boss fights really overstay their welcome compared to some games. And right there, we can see ourselves the final Tetrad, and good, because the UI is running out of space down there. We've got a Tetrad! And our final health increase. They just skip straight to the 20th heart instead of giving you a 19th, and then giving you the 20th sometime next chapter, which I find a little weird, but oh well. We try to put all the Tetrads together, but nothing happens? That's probably not good. Let's get out maybe in the light. Maybe we can see some sort of hint there. Doesn't seem like it. Mike, can you hear me? Mike, can you hear me? Mike, we need your help. Come back to Sea Island. Hurry! Micah, wait! Disconnected. You turn to the last page and say the magic words. Pa 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 mau mau. Whoa, here we go again. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 7, we're finishing off the game. See you guys there!